Have you ever been shut out by someone's silence? No explanation, no closure, just cold distance? The silent treatment isn't just silence, it's control disguised as calm. And if you're tired of feeling confused, powerless, or blamed for someone else's emotional withdrawal, this message is for you. Today you'll learn how to shut down the silent treatment, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity, calm, and confidence. Because your peace is not up for negotiation and your voice deserves to be heard. When you're on the receiving end of the silent treatment, the silence can feel louder than words. It echoes in the gaps between messages, in the lack of eye contact, in the way a conversation ends before it ever begins. And for many people, it creates a state of anxiety, confusion, and self-doubt. You wonder what you did wrong. You walk on eggshells trying to decode the silence. But here's the truth. Silence, when used as a weapon, is not power. It's avoidance. It's control. It's an attempt to dominate the conversation by removing it entirely. And that doesn't mean you're powerless. Quite the opposite. The moment you recognize that this kind of silence is a tactic, whether intentional or unconscious, is the moment you begin to reclaim your own authority in the situation. Power isn't in how loudly or forcefully someone can withhold their voice. It's in how clearly and calmly you hold your ground. When someone retreats into silence to express anger, to punish, or to manipulate, you don't have to chase them into the dark. You stay rooted in the light of clarity. There's something deeply grounding about choosing clarity over chaos. Silence often breeds assumptions. You begin to fill in the blanks, write stories in your mind, craft reasons for their silence. But you're not a mind reader, and you're not required to play detective in someone else's emotional mystery. Can't control whether someone communicates, but you can absolutely control the space you allow that silence to occupy in your life. When clarity becomes your focus, you stop asking unproductive questions like, why won't they talk to me? And you start asking better ones like, what do I need in this moment to stay emotionally safe? Clarity helps you detach from the drama and reconnect with your self-respect. It allows you to make calm statements like, I notice you're not communicating right now. I'm open to having a conversation when you're ready, but I won't continue engaging in silence that's used to hurt or control. That kind of communication is clear, it's strong, and more importantly, it doesn't mirror the dysfunction you're experiencing. You don't fight fire with fire. You don't meet silence with louder silence or with desperate noise. You meet it with presence and truth. It's not about escalating, it's about elevating. Clarity also means being honest with yourself about what's actually happening. It means acknowledging that silence can be a form of emotional distancing and sometimes even emotional abuse. When someone refuses to engage with you as a form of punishment, they're not being mature, they're being manipulative. But calling it what it is doesn't make you harsh, it makes you honest. And that honesty allows you to respond with intention instead of reaction. Reaction is what silence feeds off of. It wants you to feel confused, to question yourself, to second-guess your worth. But when you center yourself in clarity, the silence loses its grip. You stop spiraling and start grounding. You stop waiting and start choosing. And you realize that communication is a two-way street. You can't carry the full emotional labor of a relationship, a friendship, or a conversation alone. Sometimes clarity looks like stepping back. Not as revenge, but as respect for yourself. It looks like recognizing when to pause, when to stop explaining, and when to let the silence belong to the one who created it. You can't force someone to grow, but you can refuse to shrink. You can decline the invitation to emotional games by simply standing in your truth. Clarity requires courage, but not aggression. You don't have to raise your voice to make yourself heard. You simply need to know what you will and will not accept. You can express yourself with calm strength. I value open communication. If and when you're ready to talk, I'm here. Until then, I'm going to focus on my own peace. That's not cold, that's clear. There's also something important about detaching your identity from their silence. Too often, people internalize the silent treatment as a reflection of their worth. I must have done something wrong. I must not matter. I must not be enough. But that silence is not your mirror. It's their wall. And you are not required to climb it. You are not required to break yourself open to get someone else to speak. You can stay whole. You can stay grounded. You can stay centered. When you prioritize clarity, you make room for honest, meaningful conversations. And when that's not possible, you make room for peace. You stop tolerating dynamics where communication is used as currency, given when someone feels like rewarding you and taken away when they want to punish you. That's not healthy, that's not respectful, and you don't have to normalize it. Choosing clarity doesn't always mean you'll get the answers you want, but it does mean you'll stop losing yourself trying to chase them. You'll create boundaries, you'll protect your emotional well-being, and you'll stop letting someone else's silence dictate your self-esteem. Their refusal to speak isn't a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their readiness, their maturity, their emotional availability. And if they're not ready, you still are. Ready to live, ready to speak, ready to lead. When someone uses silence to create confusion, your job is not, but I won't stay in a space where I'm being emotionally shut out. That's not a threat. That's not a dramatic ultimatum. That's a boundary, and boundaries aren't walls, they're doors with locks. They allow access to those who respect the rules of the space, and they close to those who don't. Emotional silence that's used as a weapon doesn't belong in a space where respect is the rule. There's a false belief that if you love someone or care about them deeply, you're supposed to wait for them to come around, that somehow your patience will earn their attention. But love doesn't mean shrinking yourself to earn scraps of connection. It means standing firm in the belief that healthy communication is the minimum, not a luxury. When you chase closure, what you're often chasing is validation. You want the other person to confirm that you're worth engaging with, worth listening to, worth being emotionally available for. But no one gets to determine your worth by how much silence they can get away with giving you. You're not available for emotional games, you're available for growth. And growth begins with accountability, not just theirs, but yours. Your accountability is to your own emotional health, to your values, to your peace. If someone chooses to withhold communication, you're not obligated to stand there hoping they'll eventually speak. You're allowed to walk away, not to punish, but to protect. You're allowed to disengage from conversations that are being held hostage. You're allowed to take your energy where it's reciprocated. When you stop chasing closure, you start building clarity. You realize that silence doesn't mean you're being punished. It means they're not ready, willing, or able to show up in the way that you need. And that's important information. That tells you where the limits of the connection lie. That tells you what you're working with. You no longer have to guess or fantasize or imagine. You have data, and that data tells you that respect isn't being served here. And when respect isn't being served, you don't sit at the table, you rise. Setting the standard doesn't mean you're unkind. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself not to normalize dysfunction. You care enough about the relationship to expect better from it. You care enough about the other person to invite them into honest dialogue, but you're wise enough not to force them, because forced conversations don't heal, they harden. And healing never comes from dragging someone toward maturity. It comes from showing what maturity looks like and letting them decide if they want to meet you there. There is dignity in saying, this is the level I operate at. I speak, I listen, I engage. And if you can't meet me here right now, that's your choice. But I won't lower my standard to accommodate silence that's meant to control. That's emotional leadership. That's the quiet confidence that doesn't need applause or permission. And the truth is, when you stop chasing closure, you stop performing, you stop over-explaining, you stop contorting yourself to make someone else comfortable. You start living in alignment with your values. You start choosing your peace over their approval. You start remembering that closure isn't something someone gives you, it's something you choose. It's the moment you stop needing their voice to validate your decision. It's the moment you understand that walking away doesn't mean you've given up. It means you've grown up. Sometimes the hardest part of setting a standard is the silence that follows. It can feel cold, lonely, or even scary. But what you're doing in that space is reclaiming your self-respect. You're proving to yourself that your boundaries aren't theoretical, they're real. And the moment you hold to them, even when it's uncomfortable, is the moment you become unshakable. Because ultimately, the goal isn't to get them to talk. The goal is to not lose yourself in their refusal. The goal is to maintain your integrity, your calm, your ability to speak truthfully, even when they won't, especially when they won't. The silent treatment is loud with meaning, and your response is even louder, not in volume, but in clarity. Your standard speaks for itself, and when you lead with that kind of strength, people either rise to meet you or fall away. Either way, you win, because you didn't lower your worth to chase their attention. You honored your voice in the face of their silence, and that's how you begin to shut it down, with boundaries, with clarity, and with quiet power. The silent treatment often feels like a power play, an invisible wall built between two people, brick by brick, made of unspoken words and unanswered questions. When you're on the receiving end of it, the instinct is to chase, to fix, to do whatever it takes to break that silence. But the most important thing you can do in that moment is to stop looking outward and start turning inward. The real transformation begins when you recognize that you don't need to control their behavior. You need to reclaim your own emotional center. The silent treatment only has power when it provokes a reaction. It gains momentum when you begin to spiral in confusion, anxiety, and overthinking. You start asking yourself, what did I do wrong? Or how do I make them talk to me again? That mental loop becomes a form of self-torture where you play both the prosecutor and the defendant in your own emotional courtroom. But the deeper truth is that silence is not about you. It's about them. Their choice to withdraw is not an indictment of your worth. It's a reflection of how they deal with discomfort, conflict, or control. The moment you start detaching from their behavior, you start freeing yourself from their control, you stop letting their silence dictate your self-esteem. You begin to understand that emotional maturity isn't about making people talk, it's about maintaining your inner calm when they don't. That calm doesn't come from pretending the silence doesn't hurt. It comes from acknowledging your emotions without letting them hijack your clarity. When you turn the mirror inward, you start asking deeper, healthier questions. What am I feeling in this moment? What story am I telling myself about this silence? Is this a pattern I've seen before? These questions shift the power dynamic. They pull you out of reaction and into reflection. They remind you that while you can't choose how others treat you, you can absolutely choose how you treat yourself in the process. Self-awareness becomes your armor. It doesn't numb the pain, but it gives you tools to manage it. You begin to identify the emotional triggers that silence activates: fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough. These aren't flaws, they're wounds. And wounds don't get healed by chasing the person who poked them. They get healed by paying attention to them, by nurturing them with compassion, by choosing to respond from wisdom instead of impulse. Detaching from control means letting go of the belief that your worth is proven through someone else's attention. It means refusing to beg for validation. It means standing firmly in the knowledge that your voice, your needs, and your emotions are valid, even when someone else doesn't acknowledge them. You don't need their permission to be whole. You don't need their words to feel seen. You need your own acceptance, your own grounding, your own commitment to not abandon yourself. This isn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about becoming self-led. You can still care. You can still hope for resolution, but you don't let that hope keep you stuck in a cycle of emotional dependency. You stop handing someone else the remote control to your peace of mind. You take it back, you create space for reflection, you journal, you breathe, you engage in things that anchor you, you have conversations with people who nourish you. You do the internal work, not to earn someone's attention, but to stay connected to yourself in the absence of it. What happens next is subtle but powerful. As you become more emotionally grounded, their silence begins to lose its grip. You no longer feel the need to over-explain or over-apologize. You realize that silence as punishment is a form of emotional manipulation. And manipulation only works on the emotionally malnourished. But when you're full of self-awareness, self-respect, and emotional clarity, manipulation becomes ineffective. It has nowhere to land. You begin to recognize the difference between someone who needs time to process and someone who's using silence to exert control. The first is about self-regulation, the second is about domination, and when you can tell the difference, you respond differently. You don't make their silence your emergency. You don't turn their emotional withdrawal into your crisis. You calmly say, "I'm here and open to talk when you're ready," and then you step back, not to punish, but to protect your inner peace. The power in this response is that it centers your dignity. It refuses to engage in emotional warfare. It keeps the door open for healthy communication without sacrificing your boundaries. And if that door remains closed, you have enough clarity to walk through another one. You don't need to break yourself trying to be heard by someone who refuses to listen. You need to listen to yourself. That's where real strength is built. Turning inward also means building emotional boundaries, not just with others, but with your own thoughts. Because silence can be a breeding ground for mental noise. You start imagining scenarios, interpreting every gesture, filling in the blanks with fear. But fear is not fact, and speculation is not truth. So you ground yourself in what's real. You breathe. You remind yourself that your worth doesn't fluctuate based on how someone else chooses to engage or not engage. This kind of emotional mastery is not about being unaffected. It's about being intentional. You're allowed to feel disappointed. You're allowed to feel confused, but you don't let those emotions run your life. You sit with them, you acknowledge them, and then you choose the response that aligns with your values, not your pain. The more you practice this, the more empowered you become. Not louder, not harsher, just stronger. You don't let silence provoke chaos inside you. You let it be what it is, a choice someone else made. And then you make your own, to stay calm, to stay present, and to stay connected to yourself. That's how you shut down the power of the silent treatment. Not by yelling to be heard, not by chasing to be seen, but by refusing to be pulled out of your own emotional alignment. You become unshakable, not because others never try to shake you, but because you've learned how to return to yourself every single time. When someone goes silent, the most tempting thing to do is mirror that behavior, to pull away, shut down, or retaliate. You feel the sting of rejection, and your ego flares up. A voice inside urges you to give them a taste of their own medicine. But choosing to retaliate in response to the silent treatment only deepens the divide. It invites more miscommunication, more hurt, and more emotional distance. What begins as a reaction quickly becomes a pattern, one that serves no one and heals nothing. Responding instead of retaliating requires a mindset shift. It asks you to pause and reconnect with your values before reacting to your emotions. That pause is powerful. In that space, you get to choose a response that reflects who you are, rather than mimicking the behavior that hurt you. It's not about ignoring your feelings. It's about not letting them take the wheel. Emotions are valid, but without discipline, they can drive your behavior in directions that don't serve your peace. Retaliation comes from a place of fear of being dismissed, misunderstood, or abandoned. It says, if you hurt me, I'll hurt you back so you understand how I feel. But that only creates a loop of defensiveness and blame. The person who shuts down continues to feel justified, and you end up carrying the emotional weight of an interaction that never truly resolved. Retaliation offers short-term satisfaction and long-term resentment. It leaves you feeling disconnected, not only from the other person, but also from yourself. Responding, on the other hand, is rooted in self-control and emotional maturity. It says, I can feel hurt without becoming hurtful. I can speak my truth without using it as a weapon. It allows you to preserve your integrity in the middle of a difficult situation. That doesn't mean you avoid conflict or minimize your pain. It means you express it in a way that invites resolution instead of resistance. A healthy response might sound like, I notice there's been distance between us, and I'd like to understand what's going on when you're ready to talk. Simple, clear, calm. This statement does several things. First, it communicates awareness. You're not ignoring the issue. Second, it opens the door without forcing a conversation. And third, it asserts your value without aggression. You're signaling that emotional withdrawal isn't going to provoke you into chaos, but responding also means recognizing what you will and will not accept. It doesn't mean tolerating emotional neglect. It means addressing it with intention. If the pattern continues and communication never improves, responding may eventually mean creating distance, not as retaliation, but as protection. You can only meet someone halfway when they're willing to walk toward you. If they remain still or walk away, it's not your job to keep reaching. It's your responsibility to stop overextending yourself and start honoring your boundaries. Emotional leadership looks like saying, "This isn't working for me," without yelling. It looks like walking away from manipulation without slamming the door. It's not about winning, it's about preserving your energy for relationships that are reciprocal. The way you communicate during conflict speaks volumes. Retaliation says, "I want to win." A healthy response says, "I want to understand or move forward." There is a quiet dignity in showing up with grace, even when someone else disappears into silence. It demonstrates that you are not controlled by their behavior. You're not reactive, you're responsive. That responsiveness becomes a mirror. It reflects maturity, emotional safety, and balance. And sometimes that mirror causes the other person to reevaluate their approach. But even if it doesn't, you've done your part. You've led with clarity and respect. You've given them the opportunity to engage in a healthier way. It's important to remember that people are often silent not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to communicate what they're feeling. They may be afraid, ashamed, or emotionally overwhelmed. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains it. And when you understand the difference, you stop personalizing the silence and start making decisions based on clarity, not confusion. Responding instead of retaliating. Leading also influences the tone of the relationship moving forward. It sets a precedent. Conflict doesn't mean emotional warfare. It means working through the discomfort without causing more harm. And if that effort is one-sided, you eventually make peace with walking away, not because you've given up, but because you've outgrown dynamics that don't grow with you. This practice isn't just for the person you're dealing with, it's for you. Every time you respond with intention instead of impulse, you reinforce trust in yourself. You prove that you're capable of self-regulation. You build emotional endurance. You strengthen your ability to stay rooted, even when things feel uncertain. That strength becomes your compass in all relationships. It reminds you that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to match disrespect to prove your point. Your composure speaks for itself. Your restraint becomes a message. Your peace becomes your boundary. And from that place, you're able to navigate conflict not as a battlefield, but as a space for a growth or necessary release. You lead with calm. You protect your energy. You respect yourself enough not to play games, and in doing so, you shut down the silent treatment without ever lowering your voice or compromising your standards.